I gave my son a $300,000 car, his dream since he was a little boy, and he repaid me by humiliating me in front of an entire crowd. But what I did after, he never saw it coming. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Maren Hale. I raised my son, Kair, mostly alone in Oregon. I worked long days and lonely nights, building a small business so he would never feel the fear and struggle I grew up with. Cars were his passion. He talked about them non-stop, dreamed about them, and promised he would work hard to earn one someday. I believed him. But as he got older, something changed. He became cold, entitled, and easily influenced, especially after he started dating Lynette, a girl who acted like everyone was beneath her. Still, I pushed ahead and surprised him with the car he always wanted. He cried at first, and for a moment, I thought my sweet boy was still there. A week later, he invited me to a car event. I showed up proud, excited to see him shine. Instead, he let Lynette mock my clothes and then told the crowd he bought the car himself. When I spoke up, he shouted that I looked like his housekeeper. People laughed. My heart sank. I went home in silence, but I didn't stay silent for long. The car was in my name. Every document belonged to me. While he was away for the weekend, I legally took it back. When he returned, furious and shocked, I told him calmly, respect is earned. So are luxuries. He never forgot it. When I think back to those early years, it still amazes me how quickly everything fell on my shoulders. Kair's father walked out before our son even learned to speak, leaving me with a tiny apartment, overdue bills, and a baby who depended on me for everything. I didn't have time to break down. I had to survive, and I had to make sure he did too. I jumped between any jobs I could find, cleaning rentals in the mornings, helping at a floral shop in the afternoons, and taking late-night shifts at a small diner. Most days, I came home smelling like bleach, flowers, or oil, but I never let Kair see how drained I felt. I wanted him to feel secure, not scared. When he slept, I studied design books I borrowed from the library, hoping to build a better path. Over the years, I slowly shaped those long nights into something real. I started offering decorating help to landlords, then staging homes for agents who couldn't afford big companies. Bit by bit, the calls grew, and my confidence along with them. What began as a side favor turned into a business I could actually live on. It wasn't huge, but it was steady, and for the first time, I could breathe. Still, every time I looked at Kair, I felt this constant pressure inside me. I didn't want him to feel abandoned like I once did. So I tried to fill every gap, extra birthday gifts, special outings, little surprises, anything that made his world feel full. I told myself that giving him more would keep him from feeling the emptiness I carried as a child. Maybe that's where I went wrong. I gave too much and expected that love alone would guide him the right way. From the moment he could point at anything, Kair's eyes were drawn to engines, glossy paint, and the roar of anything fast. While other kids begged for action figures, he wanted miniature models of sleek machines he'd seen in magazines. By the time he hit middle school, the walls of his room were covered corner to corner with posters of cars he couldn't yet pronounce but adored with every breath. He studied them the way some kids study sports stats, memorizing specs, colors, and rare editions like it was a second language. I used to watch him trace the outlines of those cars with his fingertip, imagining himself behind the wheel. Seeing that kind of passion made me want to support him however I could. I told him that if he kept his grades steady and treated people kindly, I would someday help him reach that dream. It wasn't a guarantee, I made it clear he'd have to put in the effort too, but it was a promise from a mother who wanted her son to feel supported in something he loved. For a while, he seemed motivated by it. He'd come home excited about a test he did well on or tell me about a teacher who complimented his work. But as the years rolled on, the spark in his eyes shifted. The excitement faded into expectation, like the dream had already been handed to him instead of something he had to work toward. Little things changed first. A sharp tone when he didn't get his way. Short responses when I asked about his day. A habit of acting like chores were beneath him. I tried brushing it off as normal teenage moods, thinking it would pass once he grew older. I didn't see how deeply those small cracks were forming until much later, when they became impossible to ignore. I first heard her name when Kayer came home one afternoon with a strange brightness in his voice, the kind that didn't sound like the boy I knew. He mentioned a girl he met through a class project, someone who understood his future. I didn't think much of it until he brought her to the house a few weeks later. That was the first time I saw Lynette Drew, tall, styled to perfection, and carrying herself like she stepped out of a country club brochure. From the moment she crossed my doorway, I felt an odd tension in the air. She looked around my living room with a thin smile, the kind that wasn't really a smile at all. When I offered her something to drink, she said she wasn't used to basic brands, letting the words float in the room like perfume gone sour. I brushed it off, trying to be polite, but the message was clear. She didn't see me as someone worthy of her time. Over the next months, her presence became more frequent, and with each visit, her comments grew sharper. She'd make quiet remarks about my clothes or the size of my home, spoken softly enough to sound innocent but pointed enough to sting. Whenever I glanced at Kayer, hoping he would step in, he simply nodded along or stayed silent, as if agreeing was easier than confronting her. Slowly, I watched him drift away from the values I raised him with. He started speaking in the same dismissive tone she used, slipping into an attitude that made him seem older but colder. He spent more time at her family's place, drawn to their expensive lifestyle, their polished dinners, and the idea that he belonged somewhere grander than the life I had built. Each change felt like watching sand slip through my fingers. The boy who once shared everything with me was now disappearing behind someone else's influence, and all I could do was stand by and hope he'd find his way back. I spent years putting aside whatever I could, telling no one what I was planning. Every staging job, every late appointment, every extra client I squeezed in brought me a little closer to something I knew would light up my son's world. When the day finally came, I could hardly breathe from the mix of fear and excitement running through me. I had arranged everything so he'd see it the moment he stepped outside, shining under the morning sun, black paint deep as ink with copper lines catching every bit of light. The zenith road star. The one he'd talked about for years. He walked out the door expecting nothing more than his usual routine. When his eyes landed on the car, he froze. For a second, he looked like the little boy who used to run around with toy models, pretending he was shifting gears. His hand went to his mouth, and for the first time in a long while, tears formed in his eyes. He turned toward me with a look I hadn't seen in ages, pure gratitude mixed with disbelief. I felt my chest tighten in the best way. I had missed that expression more than I realized. He walked around the car, touching the custom stitching, the personalized interior details I chose based on things he used to tell me when he was younger. When he hugged me, it was tight and real, like he meant it. In that moment, all the tension between us seemed to fall away. I let myself believe everything was shifting back to what it once was. Maybe the cold edges he'd picked up would soften. Maybe he'd remember the connection we used to have before other influences pulled him in different directions. For a little while, it felt like hope was returning. When Kayer called to invite me to a car showcase by the lake, I felt a mix of pride and excitement. The event promised gleaming vehicles, polished floors, and a crowd that shared his passion. I dressed carefully, choosing something simple but neat, wanting to feel presentable beside him, hoping this would be a moment of connection. The resort shimmered under the afternoon sun. Rows of high-end cars sparkled, and the air smelled faintly of leather and fresh polish. I followed Kayer, eager to see his eyes light up among machines he adored. For a moment, I thought we might share a memory that would remind us of all the effort and care that had brought us here together. But then Lynette appeared. Her posture sharp, her gaze calculating, she didn't hide her disdain. She glanced at my outfit and let a small, cutting laugh escape, the kind that made everyone around tense. She murmured something about appearances and how some people didn't fit in here, loud enough for me to hear. Kayer stood beside her, silent, his expression unreadable. I searched for any hint that he would defend me, that he would step between her words and me. But he didn't. He said nothing, nodded slightly, and even seemed to share a quiet smile with her. That small gesture, the lack of protection, stung deeper than any words. I walked beside him, feeling a strange mix of disbelief and sorrow. Here I was, hoping to celebrate his dream together, and instead, I felt like an outsider in my own son's life. The pride I had packed for the day quickly became heavy, weighed down by the quiet betrayal simmering in the air. The moment I dreaded came faster than I expected. We were surrounded by shiny cars, curious onlookers, and families chatting about engines and finishes. Lynette's voice cut through the crowd like a knife. She announced loudly, "I heard Kayer bought this himself. He really knows how to treat himself, doesn't he?" Heads turned, and I felt every eye settle on us. I stepped forward gently, my voice calm but firm. "Actually, I helped him get this car." I started, hoping to correct the misconception without making a scene. Before I could finish, Kayer's face twisted, his tone sharp and cold. "Why would I let people think you bought it? You look like my damn housekeeper." The words hit me like ice. The crowd laughed, some unsure, some amused, and I froze, the air thick around me. My hands clenched, my stomach sank, and my throat burned. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. The boy I raised, the one I had sacrificed so much for, stood in front of me with a smirk, completely unbothered by the cruelty of his words. Lynette's eyes sparkled with satisfaction, and I realized how completely I had been erased in that moment. I felt every humiliation sharpen into a piercing ache, the kind that stays long after the laughter fades. My chest tightened, and I struggled to hold myself upright, my pride and love colliding violently inside me. In that instant, I knew something had to change. This moment could not define me, nor could it define my worth in his eyes. I turned away from the crowd without a word, my steps careful but deliberate as I left the showcase behind. The laughter and whispers chased me like shadows, but I focused on putting one foot in front of the other. Every memory of the years I poured into him flashed in my mind, long nights scrubbing floors, weekends spent juggling clients, the meals I skipped so he could have something special. Each sacrifice had been made with hope, with love, with the belief that it would shape him into a kind, grateful man. Now, standing alone in the quiet parking lot, the weight of it all pressed down on me. I realized something I hadn't faced before: my devotion had not humbled him. Instead, it had made him expect more, to take for granted the lengths I went to so he could live comfortably. The boy I raised, who once clung to my side with trust and admiration, had grown distant, entitled, and cruel. My heart ached, but beneath it simmered a clarity I hadn't allowed myself to feel before. Love alone could not teach respect. Sacrifice alone could not instill gratitude. And the comfort I had worked so hard to provide had blinded me to the truth. I had enabled him to forget how much effort it took to give him everything. For the first time, I understood that change had to come from a different place. My tears stung, but they weren't just for the hurt. They were a reckoning, a moment of awakening. I couldn't undo the past, but I could choose what to do next, and I would not let my devotion continue to be mistaken for weakness. After leaving, I went home and sat in the quiet of my living room, letting the anger and hurt settle into something sharper, calm, deliberate, and focused. I realized that acting impulsively wouldn't solve anything. If anything, it would only give him more power over me. I had to think clearly, and for the first time, I felt a strange sense of control returning. The car rested in my name, every contract, every receipt, and every insurance form safely filed. I had handled the financing through my business, carefully keeping all paperwork where only I could access it. All the years of preparation, every dollar saved, every late night working extra jobs, it had led to this moment where I had the upper hand. I pictured the ROAD star in my mind, no longer a trophy for him to flaunt, no longer a symbol of status he could wield over others. Instead, it became a tool, a way to make him face reality. The car that once represented his dreams could now serve as a mirror, reflecting back his entitlement and mistakes. I felt a strange steadiness in my chest. This wasn't about revenge in a wild, reckless sense, it was about reclaiming control and setting boundaries he had ignored for too long. For the first time in years, I wasn't reacting to his whims or trying to appease him. I was planning carefully, quietly, and methodically. The storm hadn't begun yet, but I could feel its approach. It wasn't anger that would hit him, it was inevitability. And when it came, he would finally understand that privilege didn't come from me, respect and consequence did. After leaving, I went home and sat in the quiet of my living room, letting the anger and hurt settle into something sharper, calm, deliberate, and focused. I realized that acting impulsively wouldn't solve anything. If anything, it would only give him more power over me. I had to think clearly, and for the first time I felt a strange sense of control returning. The car rested in my name, every contract, every receipt, and every insurance form safely filed. I had handled the financing through my business, carefully keeping all paperwork where only I could access it. All the years of preparation, every dollar saved, every late night working extra jobs, it had led to this moment where I had the upper hand. I pictured the ROAD star in my mind, no longer a trophy for him to flaunt, no longer a symbol of status he could wield over others. Instead, it became a tool, a way to make him face reality. The car that once represented his dreams could now serve as a mirror, reflecting back his entitlement and mistakes. I felt a strange steadiness in my chest. This wasn't about revenge in a wild, reckless sense, it was about reclaiming control and setting boundaries he had ignored for too long. For the first time in years, I wasn't reacting to his whims or trying to appease him. I was planning carefully, quietly, and methodically. The storm hadn't begun yet, but I could feel its approach. It wasn't anger that would hit him, it was inevitability. And when it came, he would finally understand that privilege didn't come from me, respect and consequence did. Kayer burst through the door, his face red and his voice sharp. Every step he took toward me carried years of arrogance and frustration, finally boiling over. How could you do this? You embarrassed me in front of everyone. You ruined my reputation, he shouted, slamming his hands on the kitchen counter. I watched him, breathing evenly, letting his fury fill the room while I stayed grounded. He didn't expect resistance, he didn't expect calm. I looked at him with steady eyes and said, I gave you everything. All you gave me was humiliation. Until you learn respect, you'll earn your own luxuries. My words hung in the air, quiet but heavy, cutting through his anger in a way nothing else could. For the first time, he faltered. His mouth opened, then closed. His fists relaxed, shoulders sagged, and he stared at me as if seeing someone he had never truly known. I could feel the disbelief radiating off him. He had always assumed I would tolerate anything, bend to his whims, forgive instantly. But now, boundaries had been drawn, and they were firm. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. I didn't raise my voice or threaten him further, my calmness was sharper than any yelling could be. Slowly, his anger shifted to confusion, then to something else, a realization that he had miscalculated me entirely. In that moment, I knew the lesson had begun. He might not like it, and it might take time, but finally, he was confronted with the truth: privileges aren't inherited, they are earned, and respect is never optional. Within a few days, Lynette realized Kayer no longer had the car or access to any family perks she had assumed he possessed. Her interest vanished as quickly as it had appeared. She didn't even bother to speak to him before leaving, her departure sharp and final, like a door slamming in his face. The boy who had once basked in attention now faced the stark truth: his charm and entitlement meant nothing without substance. Kayer wandered through the house in a daze, muttering complaints, flinging objects in frustration, unable to grasp how quickly his world had changed. I listened silently from the other room, letting him struggle with the consequences he had avoided for so long. My heart ached for the son I knew was still inside, but I couldn't rescue him from mistakes he had cultivated himself. I finally approached him and laid out a simple choice. You can start over the right way, I said, voice steady, with therapy to sort out your attitude, a real job to earn your own way, and responsibilities to manage. Or you can leave and figure it out on your own. I won't repeat what I've done for you before. His face twisted with a mix of disbelief and anger, but he realized this wasn't negotiation. I didn't coddle him, didn't soften my stance. The comfortable life he had taken for granted had ended. For the first time, he saw clearly that adulthood demanded more than privilege, it required effort, humility, and accountability. And just like that, Lynette was gone, Kayer was forced to face reality, and I finally felt the weight of years of sacrifice shift into a quiet, hard-earned sense of control. Months passed, and slowly, Kayer started to change. He found work at a small detailing shop downtown, spending long hours washing, polishing, and learning the patience required to care for something properly. The boy who once demanded attention and rewards now showed up early, stayed late, and listened quietly, soaking in lessons about responsibility and respect. At first, his humility was awkward, almost mechanical, but gradually it became genuine. The arrogance that had defined him for years softened, replaced by a cautious awareness of others and a willingness to take accountability for his actions. He began to notice small things he had ignored before, how much effort it took to keep the house running, the sacrifices I made, and the value of earning rather than expecting. One evening, he came to me, hesitant and quiet. "Mom," he said, voice low, "I'm sorry. Not for the car, but for everything else, for taking you for granted all these years." There was no pressure for instant forgiveness, and I didn't offer it right away. Instead, I listened, letting him speak while I measured the sincerity in his tone and actions. In that moment, I realized something profound. The act of reclaiming the car had not been about punishment, it had been about reclaiming myself. I had set boundaries, demanded respect, and finally acted for my own dignity. The Road Star was gone from his driveway, but what I had gained could not be taken away: clarity, self-respect, and the knowledge that love does not mean sacrificing one's own worth. Kayer's apology was the beginning, not the end, but it was enough to show that growth was possible, and that even the deepest wounds could slowly teach lessons that endure.